Hey there, this is Dan, you're watching the Salty Sea, and I'm here with lists for every faction in Warcry. This time I'm going to be doing the first half of Chaos. A quick reminder about structure. I'm going to start with just competitive list building across the Grand Alliance, because Warcry's list building rules really encourage Grand Alliance list building. And then I'm going to go into each faction section. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3, sometimes more lists per faction, spreading it around a little bit between competitive lists, kind of sweet lists. I'll have at least one, quote unquote, pure list for each faction. Sometimes I'll have a budget list. Building on a budget is a lot harder now than it used to be. Because of that, I won't have budget lists for every single faction. A quick reminder also that what makes a good list is often really dependent on mission style, and I'll be kind of talking about that with each faction. So if you want to get competitive with Chaos, it's kind of a more tricksy Grand Alliance than the other 3. It's not like, for example, my last list building video was Destruction, and there really is a list building paradigm for Destruction that works in each faction in terms of the way you can build soup with Destruction and what your options are there. In Chaos, that isn't necessarily true. Now, let's first take a look at what you've got available to you. And the first is you have a ton of really amazing chaff. Plague Bearers and Shatterers from Horns of Hashut are, both up there as potentially the best chaff in the game, probably alongside Kharadron Overlords and Soulblight Gravelords. And so the fact that you have 2 options there is really powerful. You have really great mobile heavy hitters within a narrow band of points cost. Anything between 235 points and 285 is just incredibly crowded in Chaos. And then the other thing you have is the Chimera. The Chimera is, of course, the scariest single threat in the game. Now, because it costs 515 points. For those who don't know, the Chimera is a monster, one of the few monsters that's still very, very good. The Chimera costing 515 points makes it so that you can't really build it in every single faction, but you can in a lot of them. And then after the Chimera, you've got a lot of mid-impact utility abilities. So the number of support heroes at your disposal in Chaos is really, really high. Now, whether you actually want to use them in any given list is a more questionable thought, but you certainly have the options. What you don't have in Chaos, you don't have any of these sort game-changing ally triples, which, for example, for Order is the main way you build. In Death can be important too. For Chaos, you don't have that. You also don't have the ability to put all your strengths in one warband. For example, a lot of the best heavy hitters for brawl missions are not heroes. And so if you want to have, say, Storm Fiends in your list, you can't do that. You have to be in Skaven, and so that kind of changes how you'll build your list. Because you don't have sort of really cheap utility allies like the Gabapalooza in Destruction, or, say, teleporting Tree Revenant Scions from Order, it's really hard to put all of your strengths in one warband, which is good. That's how it should be. I think that Chaos as a Grand Alliance is generally better designed than the other 3 Grand Alliances as far as creating interesting gameplay. So what do competitive lists look like in Chaos? The first would be anything with a Chimera and a lot of cheap chaff. A lot of factions can sort of do this, although Nurgle really does it best. Other lists tend to be faction reliant because of what I said before about how you can't fit everything into one thing, but having those mobile heavy hitters with your amazing chaff is just a really strong way to do it in general. And you have so many options with those heavy hitters that you can really do a lot of things. So let's get into Beast of Chaos. And the big highlights for Beast of Chaos, first of all, is their list building flexibility. They have options at every single price point that are playable, and that's really special. So, for example, I really don't like Bestigors, but a lot of people do, and you have them at 100 points and they're not embarrassing. You have really good chaff at 60 points in Gores that is, again, really solid. And then, of course, your big Doom Bull heroes. You have your Doom Bull, you have Bloodkinds, which are the leaders of a Bulgor troop, and they are pretty solid at the higher price point. So you have something playable at every price point, which gives you an incredible amount of flexibility. You also have, say, interesting support heroes at the kind of support hero slot, so you can really do anything. The lowlights are their abilities are kind of limited. So you have Brayherd Ambush, which is the sort of standard ability, and then you have Devolve, which is the kind of tricksy Great Bray Shaman ability that can force movement nightmares onto your opponents. But those are a little bit more niche in their usage. Brayherd Ambush only goes off in round 1. It's very good, but it's just limited to only being used in round 1. And Devolve is just attached to one fighter in the whole group. So otherwise, the rest of the abilities are not good, which limits you a little bit in Beasts of Chaos. And then the other issue is that they're not best in class at anything. I think that they pay some points for how good Brayherd Ambush is, since every fighter has access to it. But you only use Brayherd Ambush in the first round, and so I don't think it's as impactful as maybe essentially you're paying more points for it than how good it is, even though it's quite good. So because of that, they're not best in class at anything. They generally tend to be pretty quick, but not fast. And so they pay points for having some speed without necessarily having all the benefits of being like truly fast. But let's take a look at some lists. And the first is they're a pretty good Chimera home. Here's two different ways to run Chimeras. We don't have a ton of examples of people trying it out with Beasts of Chaos, but these are the two directions I would go. The first being a Great Bray Shaman, 4 Gores, a Bestigore, and a Chimera. Just that being there with the Great Bray Shaman to either pull threats off of the Chimera, which I think is really useful. You know, things like Gut Lords, things like Annihilator Primes, things like, you get the idea, right? Auric Mega Bosses. Those can be pretty scary for a Chimera. They don't really want to deal with those. And so having a Great Bray Shaman to kind of pull them away can be pretty helpful. The issue there is you don't have a lot of killing power outside of the Chimera, so you could also go with a Beast Lord, 5 Gores, and a Chimera. The Beast Lord is actually a pretty reasonable threat, especially for being move 5. Most move 5 fighters don't really do much for their points, but the Beast Lord can actually kind of give the opponent a headache or two, and that can be really nice to have with a Chimera. One of the things that kind of changed with the Chimera going up in points is it becomes so much harder to have a second fighter that actually does anything and have any sort of numbers. And this second list here actually does achieve that, which is really, really nice. People tend to run Chimeras with Nurgle. Certainly I've done that at a tournament to great success. But one thing about running it with Nurgle is you need that Sloppity Bile Piper to boost the movement of the Plague Bearers to get them into position. Gores are already fast enough to get into position on their own, so that's why it can be nice to spend your hero slot on something with a little bit more utility to help the Chimera out, either by reducing pressure on it via the Beast Lord or by literally pulling things off of it with the Great Bray Shaman. Let's do more regular Beasts of Chaos lists. And the first, I think, is a really lovable list that I'm just calling Pamplona. You can call it the Running of the Bulls. A Doom Bull, 2 Blood Kinds, one with the Great Axe and one with 2 axes, and then just 4 Gores with paired blades. So you've got your 7 fighters here to be able to have a few activations, compete in a wide variety of situations. But you've also just got a really scary threat in every deployment group and a really lovable threat in every deployment group. Another really cool thing about this list is it can be put together really cheaply if you don't use GW sculpts. And, you know, a lot of things can be done cheaply if you don't use GW sculpts. But non-GW sculpts are really good for Doom Bulls and Blood Kinds. There are so many incredible Minotaurs out there that you can purchase for pretty cheap. So this can be a budget entry point into the game if you are sort of clever about how you do things without having to necessarily, you know, infringe on anyone's copyright. For example, every list is a budget list if you're literally just like recasting, but this one can be done sort of above board and still be pretty cheap and be pretty interesting and unique. Another way to do Beasts of Chaos is with an attack buff. So Bloodkinds with Great Axe have 8 on crit, 3 on a hit, only 3 attacks, but a high strength. It's the perfect thing. If we had access to Brugits in Chaos, you'd be Brugitting up these Bloodkinds all day, right? Now, we don't have Brugits, but we do have Dark Oath War Queens, we do have Chaos Sorcerer Lords. The Chaos Sorcerer Lord gives you +1 attack and +1 strength, which is especially nice for a Bloodkind where that strength 5 is usually enough to be hitting on 3s, but when it's not, man, is it not. Like, for example, if you're playing against Stormcast and you're paying for that strength 5, all those points for strength 5, and you're still only hitting on 5s, that can be a real heartbreaker. And so that Chaos Sorcerer Lord giving it, 4 attacks on strength 6 can sometimes be an incredible deal. And then the Dark Oath War Queen, of course, having a pretty respectable damage output in her own right, being able to boost things in a bit of a range, is really nice. So because this is running 2 different attack buff sources that you then hopefully combine with Onslaught when the thing is actually attacking, because you've got 2 of them, you're pretty all in on the concept. So I would run either a Bulgor with a Great Axe, which is like a small Bloodkind Great Axe, or 2 Bestigors, which kind of enjoy having attack buffs as well. You can run the 2 Bestigors next to the War. When she gives +1 attack all around, she gives it to herself too, which is really nice. This is a really, really cool one, and this is one that you're not necessarily playing at the highest power level because you've got, you're paying a lot of points for your speed with the Gors and the Bloodkind, but you are creating a list that has a really high skill ceiling. And that can be really fun for people, where if you just kind of take the pedal off the gas a little bit in terms of your play, how hard you think between each point, you can have a lot of fun just like around the local shop if other people are not playing very powerful lists. But then if you like really focus in and really try to pilot this kind of list to perfection, you can get a power out of it. And that can be really great. Having the option to go with 8 models or 9 models, depending on what kind of tournament you're playing in, is also really nice. If you are just going to go pure Rumble Pack, which is for people who don't know, that is a sort of mission pack of all objective lists except for one, where just all of England is trapped in this in this mission pack right now. A lot of places are also playing it outside of England. I don't think it's a very good mission pack, but what it does is it really, really favors people just running a ton of models. And so what I would do is the Great Bray Shaman. It's all objective missions, so a GBS to pull things off of objectives can be nice. And then a Bulgor, because you do need something that kills chaff. And then, of course, you just flood the board with chaff. I would go with 6 Gore and 3 Bestigor, because things like Bestigors are a little bit better in the Rumble Pack, where there aren't no one can afford really heavy hitters, so nothing's really preying on those fragile Bestigors. Now let's get into Khorne. And hilariously, Khorne is sort of the same faction as Beasts of Chaos. They've got a lot of the same strengths, right? They've got sort of a variety of leaders. They've got cheap, quick chaff that isn't embarrassing in the Blood Reavers. Their Blood Warriors with 2 axes, I think, are a little bit better than Bestigors, but they're still kind of that similar thing. They also cost a tiny bit more. And then, they've got good expensive options. With Khorne, it's not quite as expensive in that you've got, Korgoraths at 205 points, but still just a very similar situation with so much list building flexibility. And of course, you have that same, Bloodbind working the same as Devolve coming out of Slaughter Priests in Khorne. Some other highlights, though, of Khorne are there's just a lot of really beloved meme lists and build around abilities in Khorne, kind of at every power level. There are a lot of traps. For example, half the heroes are secretly really bad, but some of them are beloved anyway, and you can build around them. A lot of very silly stuff you can do in Khorne, and you can get somewhat competitive as well. Some of the problems, when I say there's lots of traps, one of it is some of the heroes are just not good, but some of it is there are Blood Reaver and Blood Warrior builds that are just purely strictly worse than other builds, and by a massive margin. And so if you maybe built your Khorne for AOS and you kind of stumble into Warcry with them, you might just like have flipped the wrong coins, and you might just like not really have an effective list because you're running the bad Blood Reaver, and then you're running the bad Blood Warrior, and then it's like, where am I going with my life? It can be really tough that way. So that part's a little bit of an issue. So, if you are interested in playing Warcry and AOS, I would say build your things for Warcry, because the difference in quality between Warcry or between the builds in AOS is much, much smaller than the difference in quality between the builds in Warcry. Also, unfortunately, Skull Reapers and Wrathmongers, you really can't run more than one of them. They're in a really odd spot. They're expensive. They don't really do that much, which is too bad because I think they're the coolest sculpts in the faction. Let's get into some lists. The first, if I were going to do, again, the Rumble Pack, as long as this sort of is semi the law of the land, I'm going to keep giving certain lists for this for all objective mission tournaments. It would be a Mighty Lord of Khorne, a Blood Warrior, a Raptorix, and 9 Blood Reavers. So you're really flooding the board here, 12 models. I don't think this list is my idea of fun, and that 9 Blood Reavers is just going to be tedious to move around. But in objective missions, this is an incredibly powerful list, and you could absolutely go 3-1, maybe 4-0 in an all objective tournament. And if that's what you want to do, that's awesome. One list I want to start with Bloodbound is, I'm calling it KISS, keep it simple, stupid. A Slaughter Priest, because just that utility. The Slaughter Priest that costs 195 instead of 185 is sort of a self-contained combo with Bloodbind dragging you to it, and then him being an incredible sort of attacking piece. Then 2 Korgoraths, because they're just stompy and scary and fun. And then 6 Blood Reavers. It's just really simple, 9 fighters, lots of threat, 1 threat in each deployment zone. Just really simple list, gonna be good. You might get tired of really only having one trick, but some people like it straightforward. They like to just go and smash, and for those people, I think this is a really good list that can also survive in a tournament with a wide variety of different things, given how the Blood Reavers are fast and there's a lot of them. Some more off the wall versions of Khorne. One is, well, this is just my favorite thing in Khorne, is the Swole Master. That's what I'm calling it. So Wrath Masters are sweet. They have 6 attacks, which is really punished in the current edition if you're not hitting on 3s, because you can just get countered off the board. And so that can be tough, but Wrath Masters have a really cool quad. I know I don't build around quads, but their quad is just, they get a better rampage, which is amazing. And then, they can die a little faster than you want them to, but not that bad because you're only paying 210 points for them. And then you're going to want to kind of buff that strength thing to make it so that they always hit on at least 4s, hopefully 3s. I mean, when you get 6 attacks hitting on 3s, that's really amazing. So a couple different ways to do it. One is with Slaanesh. You can do a Blissbringer. Then you have a True Blood to have a net to kind of stick things in place. I've found that True Bloods are really solid. Then you can have 2 Blood Warriors and 3 Blood Reavers. So just a lot of different bits of utility things you can do. The Blissbringer is really special because it has this strength buff in a pretty large 6-inch aura around it. And then if you don't need the strength buff, it also has a cool net ability. It only has a 1-inch range, but you can sort of glue something to the Blissbringer, or you can run in with the Blissbringer, use its sort of crushing grip ability, that's what the ability is called, and then disengage off of it, and now you've left the thing stranded. A lot of really cool, clever things you can do with the Blissbringer, and it's pretty fast in case you end up in a hunter mission where speed matters. So just a lot to really love about this kind of setup, in that you can get off crazy combos with your Wrathmaster, you can hit your opponent with a ton of disruption, You can do a Nurgle version of this where you remove the Blissbringer and the True Blood, and then you add in a Lord of Plagues and a Korgorath. That would be a much slower, much stompier list, but the combat power in that list would be absolutely mind-blowing. And so if you're in an event or just playing around with friends where you aren't too worried about like long-range hunter missions, where you just have to cover the entire width of the board in one activation, and if you can't, you might lose. That Nurgle version with just so much combat power can be really, really sweet. This is super functional for, a meme list. You've got the reach, you've got disruption, you've got damage. That's what I love about Khorne, and that's why I put that in their highlights, is they can make these lists that feel like memes, but then when you actually play them, they just have an incredible amount of functionality. We've got a really awesome player in the Midwest who plays these all Korgorath lists with 3 Korgoraths, and it seems like a meme, but like you can do a lot of clever things around the Korgoraths with your 400 remaining points. You can just get a lot of stuff out of those 3 Korgoraths, things like that. So Khorne just absolutely excels at that kind of list building. So here's another version of the same thing with same thing in the meme list that is surprisingly good. So you have a Bloodstoker for 165 points, 2 Korgoraths, then a Slangor Slakehorn, which is for 225 points. You have something that's maybe not quite as stompy and scary as a Korgorath, but has an absurd threat range in that you can have 6-inch move, then you have the double to give yourself a free move, then you can start attacking at 12-inch, and then it's got 2-inch range, so that at 14-inch threat range, you can still attack something in a turn, which just means nothing is safe. Then you just have 3 Blood Reavers, so you actually have kind of reasonable numbers with this list. You have just an incredible amount of utility. Khorne plus Slaanesh, I know they're supposedly rivals, so some people won't like this kind of thing for for like lore reasons. But if they were actually enemies, why would they synergize so well? I mean, when you look at the Swole Master, they synergize perfectly. When you look at the Bloodstoker, they synergize perfectly. They're clearly not actually enemies. They're clearly allies. This is another one, again, I just said it, but a meme list with just so much that's actually going on here that can make you actually enjoy playing it. I just think Khorne is so well designed as a faction, even though they're not necessarily at the top of the competitive meta right now. More factions should be designed like Khorne. All the factions that are at the top of the competitive meta should be adjusted down until they're the same power level as Khorne, because I just think this faction is really, really well designed. Well done, GW. Demons of Khorne, unfortunately, are not in that same boat. So one highlight, though, is they have Hungry for Flesh, which is you get a free move ability as long as there is an enemy within 6 inches. Now, Doggos, the sort of hounds of Khorne, they're overcosted by, at least 10 or 15 points each, but the ability is great. And so, they can be fun to play. The other highlight, sort of, their elites are okay. The Bloodmaster, the Gorehound, the Skullmaster, the Blood Hunter, none of those are embarrassing to be running. They're also not the best at their points cost for what they do. The Gorehound being 240 points. It's a tough ask when there's at 235 and 245, those blood kinds, as far as like other elites that any Chaos faction can run. And they are both maybe debatably better than a Gorehound. Chaos just has so much competition at these price points, the Skullmaster being 285, the Blood Hunter being 235, I believe. It's just a lot of competition, and so Demons of Khorne are legitimately sort of playable at those price points, or their elites are legitimately playable at those price points, but also other factions have things that are just like a tiny hair better. Some of the lowlights for Demons of Khorne. 1, Bloodletters are awful. They are terrible. They don't do anything. They will put out damage per point, but they die pretty quick per point. They don't move fast enough, and that their move 4, which is not bad, but with no shenanigans. So the move 4 is true foot slogging at 4. And so they just don't have time to get their damage in. They have to double move to get to a place. Then they're not necessarily dictating the terms of engagement once they get there, because at only 8 inches to move in one turn, they're like just barely getting there, as opposed to, say, a move 5 thing that would get there and still have 2 inches to kind of jockey for position, have the 1-inch range. So it's like they're just incredibly straightforward. Your opponent knows exactly what you're capable of. You have this strength 4 that you're paying for, which great, but at 1/4 damage profile, you're really only crit fishing. So you'd rather be like a demonette. You'd rather not pay those points for strength, even though strength is generally pretty good in Warcry right now. You'd rather not pay those points because the only thing you deal damage on is crits anyway. So it's just tough. Bloodletters, it's a combo of stats that don't fit together, which is too bad. You also just don't have any list building flexibility. Your cheapest thing is 80 points. You have a huge gulf in between. There's nothing like more expensive than more elite than a Bloodletter until you get to Juggernaut Riders, Blood Crushers, at like 170 points, which is just so many more. So the parts don't fit together to make reasonable lists very easily. And then you also just have no synergy. Like I said before, like Bloodletters don't even synergize with their own stats. None of the elites of Khorne really make Bloodletters better. The dogs, Fleshhounds and Gorehounds, have that great ability, so that's really nice, but like they're independent operators, and so you don't ever need more than like 2 of them. There's also just better options in Chaos for things with that ability. Slaaneshes, Slangors are just better dogs. And then it's just that every fighter you have is just worse than similar options in Chaos, right? The Skullmaster is not as good as both the Varangard and the Doom Bull, and probably the Juggerlord too at the same price point. Now, Skullmasters don't suck. They're good. They're not as good as other things that are better. And there's no abilities. I mean, that's what I mean by no synergy. They don't have separate leader abilities. The Skullmaster doesn't have an ability. The Bloodmaster doesn't have an ability, which is such a shame because like Bloodmasters are known in AOS. This was one of the first sources of like the ability that makes foot slogging heroes playable, where you can attack with them and then immediately attack with their unit, stuff like that. If Bloodmasters just like they had Inspiring Presence but on a double or something, I mean, that would be so cool, right? It would be exactly the same as it is in AOS. It'd be a really nice way to just like, Inspiring Presence doesn't really get used much, but on a double you would use it. But you don't get that. So you don't get anything with Demons of Khorne. They're just a broken faction that just doesn't work. That said, I will make some lists with them. I would say the best way to run them is to have as little Khorne Demons as possible in your list, where you just have your Bloodmaster. Bloodmasters are actually just like a perfectly serviceable foot slogging fighter hero. Then a Gorehound. Like I said before, the dogs are just really solid independent operators, which means that you don't really get anything out of having, like, there's massive diminishing returns, I would say, to each dog. But your first dog is actually really good. So the Gorehound is really good. And then 1 Bloodletter. We're trying to have as few as possible, right? Because Bloodletters are terrible. So then I'm running 3 Raptorix. You can just paint your Raptorix as red. They actually do kind of look reasonable in Khorne because, just like really angry looking creatures kind of fit Khorne's aesthetic. And then running a Fomeroid Crusher, which is just like an awesome heavy hitter that goes in kind of almost any list that needs a heavy hitter. And so you have like your Gorehound that is sort of sprinting around the field, and then you have your really stompy Fomo Crusher, which is, I think, a really good combination. And if I had to run Khorne Demons at a tournament, this is how I'd run them, with more than half of their points as allies and thralls, because these allies and thralls are really good at filling the holes that Khorne Demons need. A functional, again, this is Still bad because it's Khorne Demons, but a very functional, pure Khorne Demons list. I've played this list a few times with a Bloodmaster, a Gorehound, a Fleshhound, and 400 points is, I think, 5 Bloodletters. And you have 8 fighters. You have a threat in each deployment group, and it's just very functional, right? Your Bloodletters have at least numbers. They can get onto an objective. If they roll some crits, then they get to do real damage. Let you feel like you're in the game playing Warcry, in the way that a lot of Khorne Demons lists, you get on the table and you kind of don't feel like you're playing Warcry. This one you will feel like you're playing Warcry, you're just at a low power level. Nurgle Rotbringers. Really interesting, really cool faction. One of the big highlights is that they're slow. Slow fighters have dominated 2nd edition. And you just get a ton of stats for the price with all of your Nurgle Rotbringers. Now, most of the stats are in wounds, which is a little bit tough because when you're slow, that's usually okay. If you have a ton of killing power, right? Because then it's like, yeah, I'm slow, but when I get there, you're dead. Or you just have tons of numbers. So it's like, ooh, excuse me, but when you have tons of numbers, you're like, yeah, I'm slow, but I'm scoring all the points. I'm just like creating this wave of points where every treasure I get, there's 3 of me in the way between you and that treasure, and you have to chew through all of these. And every objective I take, well, there's a bunch of me on it, and I'm slow. But now that I'm on the objective, my lack of movement isn't hurting me at all. And now I get tons of stats for my price, and you have to fight me on this objective, and you're going to lose. These don't have either of that, which is kind of a problem, right? So they're slow and unkillable, but like I get to the objective. Once I'm there, yeah, my lack of movement doesn't matter, but I'm still outnumbered and I don't have a ton of killing power, right? So I have to chew through you. Yeah, you're not going to take down a single one of my fighters, but I'm not going to even the numbers on this objective until round 4 sometimes, because it's like, it just takes me forever to kill anything because just you have so many wounds. So it can be really tough when you are outnumbered with Nurgle Rotbringers. It can be really tough in non-objective missions when you have to run around with Nurgle Rotbringers, and sometimes like for for Nurgle Demons, for example, you flood the board so much that there's nowhere for your opponent to run in a hunter mission or a killing mission. And so you kind of capture them in a net with all of your slow, high numbers fighters. Rotbringers, they can kind of slalom through you, right? Because they can just avoid you because you are slow and you don't have a lot of fighters. So because of all those limitations, there is power in Nurgle Rotbringers, right? Because they've got the things that they're good at, they're incredible at. But list building is just really awkward because you have to try to make up for these many different shortcomings. But one of the other things that makes list building difficult is, so here's the basic Blight King stat line. 110 points for, again, 25 wounds at toughness 4 is a ton of beef to have for 110 points. But that stat line, 3424, really needs help to get to where it can kill anything, right? That's a stat line that you'd be happy with on, a 90-point fighter. You'd be pretty happy with that stat line, but on 110 points, it just adds up to just not enough offense. So the issue is, Nurgle does have a buff. It's a strength buff that all of their heroes have. It's called Grandfather's Blessing. The problem is, it's a lot less powerful than, say, an attack buff triple would be. Grandfather's Blessing is a triple. So, for example, a Blight King, unmodified, deals 4 damage on average to toughness 4. With Grandfather's Blessing, that's 5. But with a +1 attack buff, that's 5.33. Now, I know, you never get that 1/3 of a damage, but just like, you do real things just a little more often with that +1 attack buff. Plus, you have the fact that +1 attack always buffs your damage output. +1 strength only buffs when relevant, so it's like really relevant against toughness 4 and against toughness 3, but against toughness 5, it's a little less. Against toughness 6, it does nothing. Against toughness 3, it does nothing. So against toughness 5, it's like it's valuable, but less so. Against toughness 4, it's quite valuable, but again, less than +1 attack would be. And against toughness 3 and toughness 6, it does nothing. So strength buffs need to be better than attack buffs to be as good as them, if that makes sense, because they don't work in every situation. And Grandfather's Blessing just isn't, and it doesn't particularly combo with what Blight Kings are doing. For example, a Wrathmaster gets a huge benefit from that Grandfather's Blessing combo, as I talked about in the Khorne section, because your unmodified is 8, Grandfather's Blessing gives you 10 against T4, whereas +1 attack would only give you 9.33, right? Because there's so many attacks here that the +1 strength is incredibly valuable. So it's so good against toughness 4 and enough against toughness 5 that it's really worth running a strength buff over +1 attack things. The same is true with, Slaanesh. They have their own strength buff, but it actually combos with their fighters, right? Like Fiends at 4-3-2-4, they need that extra strength really badly. And so, Grandfather's Blessing, or in Slaanesh's case, it's like Locus of something, that actually benefits Fiends and gives them real internal synergy, whereas you just have this kind of weird non-bow with Nurgle. So just a bit of math hammer there that kind of talks about why it's hard to build Nurgle Rotbringer lists. That doesn't mean you can't do it. So here is the new Harbinger of Decay box. The new Harbinger of Decay is incredible. It's one of my favorite models. If you do that, plus a big Minotaur, and then just your 5 Blight Kings, that's a really good list. So the Regiment of Renown box, you can save painting your flies for last. You won't use them. And just get a Minotaur. And then you have a really good, it's not really a budget entry into the game, but it's a very sort of condensed entry into the game. You can also do a Lord of Afflictions plus 6 Blight Kings. You would just need to convert up a 6th Blight King. There's a ton of lists for Nurgle Rotbringers. One of the reasons why they're actually not very budget friendly, even though it seems like they should be, is because almost every list that I write with them requires 6 Blight Kings, and they only come 5 at a time. There is kind of a lot of stuff you can do with this, and I think you can get pretty far with this list. Harbingers of Decay, I've actually played them a little bit. They are solid, but not incredible, so just a thing to keep in mind. They're not bad, but they're not the strongest thing you can be doing. Another way to run them is to try to make these Blight Kings into actual threats. Like I said before, they benefit much more from attack buffs than they do from strength buffs, so let's get one in there. The Chaos Lord, I think, is a really awesome threat where you've got that 2-inch range, which is really nice to have. They're not quite as slow as the rest of Nurgle, and then that 5 toughness. They're just like a great all-around fighter that then at the cost of a triple can kind of supercharge your offense, which is really nice. Then you also get a Lord of Plagues, which is just a really good fighter on its own, and then 4 Blight Kings here, 3 of the regular ones, and then 1 of the speed buff Blight Kings, so you can actually get to places, especially combined with your 2 Raptorixes and the Chaos Lords. This is one that's, again, wanting to run these guys in a way that's not quite as desperate for speed, not needing to run a sort of really fast dragon type of character. And then also, you'll notice you have 8 fighters here instead of just 7, which helps you quite a bit in terms of activations and objectives and things like that. The 2 Raptorixes, I think, Raptorixes in general, I think, really add everything that Nurgle Rotbringers are really looking for. They don't have a cheap fighter. Raptorixes give you that. You can run up to 3 of them with the Thrall rules, and I would consider trying to always fit 1 Raptorix into your list. Finally, let's get to Nurgle Demons. The highlights for Nurgle Demons are, 1, they're the best home for a Chimera because Plague Bearers combo with it so well. And they just have the ultimate peanut butter power because Plague Bearers, you could just get so much for 50 points. And it's a meta that right now really rewards doing so. Also, just the list building rules, they really privilege the factions with good chaff because elites can just be traded between factions for free, because that's just what the list building rules are. You can bring in allies, but you can't ally chaff. You can't ally regular troops, and so the lists with really cheap regular troops are really good at being able to complement anything you want. The one lowlights, it all kind of falls apart without Plague Bearers, which means GW knows that Plague Bearers are a little too good. They are going to overreact when they nerf them. Plague Bearers at 60 points would make Nurgle Demons completely unplayable. Like, you would not be able to do anything functional. And I know that sounds weird because it's only 10 points, but 10 points is 20% of the cost of Nurgle Demons, right? That's like, that's just a really big hike. And so you would really, really struggle if Peanut Butters were not sort of overtuned a little bit. I think at 55, you could really hamstring their ability to make ridiculously broken Chimera lists, and, you know, they'd still be really playable as their own faction, but they're not just going to barely bump the points to 55. GW just doesn't work that way. They don't like to be seen as not fully understanding the problem, so they will ban Hammer Nurgle Demons off of the board. Luckily, I don't expect that to happen in the next 6 months. I would be surprised if it happens any earlier than maybe next May. So you have a lot of time for Nurgle Demons to be really good. Let's get kind of the stankiest demon list out of the way. The list to beat in all of Warcry right now is a Sloppity Bile Piper, a Chimera, 1 Nurglings, and 5 Plague Bearers. Now, it is a beatable list. There are things you can do, you know, with various sort of high threat options that you've got. You know, I put out a Monster Hunter video, and all of those things are pretty valid. This list really doesn't want to see Annihilators, which is sort of the Stormcast fighter. However, and you also don't really want to see things like Brugits in Destruction, you know, having their friends, their Netters and Boggle Eyes lock down your Chimera, and then having a Brugitted up thing just come in and charge into it. There are things that you're scared of with this list. Warcry is at least a well enough designed game that there are counters to the best thing in the game, but this is the best thing in the game. And the reason it's the best thing is the Chimera is the scariest threat, and then you have enough activations that you can kind of time things with the Chimera. Plague Bearers being hard to kill is the ideal chaff, because you want to keep those activations for as long as you can, and you just want to be in a situation where the Chimera is killing their stuff faster than their scariest thing kills your stuff, if it comes to that. And all of this kind of lets you do that. And so if you are the sort of person who wants to go into tournaments and win them, this is a really, really good place to start. This is one of maybe 4 or 5 different concepts in Warcry that I would say is the thing you should play if you really, really want to win a tournament. If you want to take Nurgle Demons to tournaments without a Chimera, though, you can still do it in really competitive ways. So, for example, if you're going into the Rumble Pack, where it's going to be all objective missions, that is sort of where Nurgle can really shine. So if you go Sloppity Bile Piper, a Fomeroid Crusher, 1 Nurgling, and then 10 Plague Bearers, you'll have 13 fighters. You'll be almost impossible to clear off objectives. You'll have a thing that could credibly claim to be the scariest fighter on the board a lot of the time in the Fomeroid Crusher. You could also bring in an Ogroid Myrmidon if you want that 2-inch reach, which can be nice. And then so you'll have the most numbers and potentially the scariest thing on the board. That is an incredible combination to have in any objective mission. And it'll just put you in a really amazing place. Now, if you want to sort of have a little bit, maybe spread your quality around a little bit, you can have a Chaos Lord or a Wrathmaster instead of your Crusher, and then you can upgrade a Plague Bearer to another Nurgling, which gives you a little bit more, it puts your movement in more places and gives you a few more options. The Chaos Lord being able to pump Plague Bearers, giving you more options for crits, more potential for crits, can be really good, but personally I would go with the Crusher. If you're doing like a really brawl heavy event, where maybe numbers don't matter as much, but hitting power does, I would go with a Plague Bringer. That's the flying Plague Bringer on a fly. A Fomo Crusher a Bloodkind with Great Axe, and 5 Plague Bearers. Cool thing about this list is, you know, 8 fighters is maybe a little more than you would normally do in an all brawl event, but you've got these fighters that are actually really hard to kill in one shot, especially when they're using their reaction. And then your big scary things are really good at killing. And so you can kind of use your Plague Bearers to get in your opponent's way with their high brawl things, and then you can do a ton of damage with your Crusher, your Bloodkind. Your Plaguebringer is kind of a pretty respectable fighter for being a flying thing. And also flying can just be good when you're trying to hunt down a treasure. My favorite Nurgle Demons list, the one that I've played a little bit and I just think is really the bee's knees, is a Sloppity Bilepiper, a Fomaroid Crusher, a Mindstealer Spheranx, and 7 Plague Bearers. You've got 10 bodies for objective missions. You've got an incredible ability to run things down with your Fomaroid Crusher being move 5, but your Mindstealer Spheranx being move 8. Really fast things that don't have fly can be kind of good in this edition because you're not overpaying for the fly keyword in a situation where a lot of missions don't really need it right now. And also it just costs more than it used to. And then the Spheranx and the Fomaroid Crusher have a lot of things they can do with dice. They can affect your opponent in a ton of ways. And then, of course, Sloppity Bilepiper, moving things quickly around the board, can mean that between the two really heavy-hitting fast things and the Sloppity, you actually have an incredible ability to kind of play flexibly with this list. And I've just been really, really happy running it. What about if you're kind of a more chill kind of guy and you want to play Nurgle, but you don't want to be known as like a tournament, annoying tournament guy? You can do that. You can play a bunch of speedy green cherubs, is what I call this list, with a Plaguebringer and 7 Nurglings. I really love the 6-3-1-3, 6 attack, strength 3, 1-3 profile. But it's really bad if it's all you have, because you can just get really blown off the board with counter. The one thing about Nurglings is because they're low toughness, high wounds, counter is not quite as bad for them because they might do 5 damage to themselves getting countered, but that's only a quarter of your hit points as opposed to half of your hit points with a lot of other fighters in the game. So that's one thing, but you could be in a really bad situation fighting like dwarves, for example, with this list. But man, would you melt through stuff like Stormcast? They would really, really hate to come up against you. So Nurglings can be really cool. Plus 8 fighters with such a sweet meme list is a lot. If you want kind of Hunter Nurgle, you can bring in this Plague-ridden, an Aviarch on disc, a Juggerlord, Nurglings, and 5 Plague Bearers. And this kind of dovetails, it's kind of a similar structure of a list to my favorite list with the Crusher and the Spheranx, but sort of dropping Sloppity for maybe a slightly less powerful option than the Plague-ridden, but letting you spend more points on sweet stuff. And that's what's so amazing about Nurgle, is because Plague Bearers give you sort of numbers for cheap. Nurgle is an incredible place to put all of your favorite heavy-hitting things in Chaos. And remember, one of the first things I said about Chaos is they have incredible options at the top end for expensive, exciting fighters. Chaos has more expensive, exciting fighters than any Grand Alliance, and Nurgle is the best place to run them because you can just put 2 of them in there and still have a really cool list that does lots of things. Your Nurglings can kind of get other speed if you decide to have kind of slow friends in there, and that works really well. So for this one, like the Juggerlord from Khorne is really, really beloved. The Aviarch on disc, people never stop trying to make that work. The issue with it is it's pretty fragile, and if you overcommit with it once, you've lost a ton of your warband. But here you have so many Plague Bearers and other tough things that you can go tie up whatever the scariest thing is for the Aviarch, and then get to fly around the board with your cool Aviarch with its amazing triple that's so fun to use. You just get a lot out of what this warband can do for you. So those are some ideas for Nurgle Demons. I will be covering the rest of Chaos in another video. Chaos is just too big a Grand Alliance to get all of it into one video, but I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will be back with more Chaos soon. Until then, may all your rolls be crits.